to this brand new lecture series on economic survey. Now, in the previous lecture, I did tell you that economic survey is actually very important. It's very important. Why? Because I gave you 4 reasons for that. I told you that it's not just important from the perspective of economics, it is also important from the perspective of environment, society, and various government policies and schemes. Okay? But now, before starting economic survey, let me set this straight at the outset, at the very outset. And this is that, well, economic survey is a government document. And the thing is that government is basically reporting on the state of Indian economy. Now, government has a natural bent towards positive things. So you in this document won't find many critical points about Indian economy. But it is important for you to know the positive points as well. And for that reason, economic survey is important. So as we'll go along with this lecture, you'll realize that most of the times government is talking about Indian economy and it seems pretty good. Indian economy is doing fine. Not just fine, actually very well. You'll get that sense. But you might think that this is all wrong. Don't think about that. Well, this is a government document and government tends to focus more. It will discuss some critical points, no doubt about that. But government tends to focus more on the positive aspect of Indian economy, and we should be aware of positive aspect, because when you write mains answers, well, you should be aware of positives as well as negatives, right? So for that reason, well, get a hold on positive aspects as well. All right. Now we will begin with first chapter, and first chapter is basically an introductory chapter. It is basically giving us an introduction on the upcoming chapters. So as far as the upcoming chapters are concerned, well, the brief summary of those upcoming chapters would be found in this chapter number 1. So it's a very good way to start economic survey. All right. By the way, as far as the notes are concerned, they would be provided in your course. All my Prelims Powerplay students, well, the notes for this chapter and every other chapter in a very brief summarized form would be given to you. Memorize those notes, because those notes are the only source for economic survey as far as you are concerned. It should be the only source. Don't start reading economic survey on your own. Okay? All right then. Let's begin. Chapter number 1, economic survey, and the title for this chapter is State of the Economy 2025-26. And they basically gave a title also. Now, this was the title, but basically a catchphrase along with the title. And that was Pushing the Growth Frontier Amidst Global Uncertainty. As you can see from this title, that globally, the economy is not doing that well. Okay, there is global uncertainty, and that is because of Trump's tariffs, so many wars, so many problems, geopolitical conflicts. Okay, supply chain problems, US-China conflict. It is because of that reason, well, there is uncertainty, absolute uncertainty, right? Now, in this uncertainty, India is the shining star. That's what this line means. Okay, India is pushing the growth frontier where everyone else is not able to do so. Now, the proof of this fact that India is pushing the growth frontier despite having bad environment in the entire world is given in this chapter. So there will be certain points where India is performing really well. Okay, so we should be mindful of those points. Okay, so let's start with this. So, resilience in the fragmented world. What does it mean? That the world is fragmented. Okay, while the global economy navigates trade wars and divergent monetary paths. Divergent monetary paths? Well, monetary policy, we are all familiar with monetary policy, right? So monetary policy can be of 3 types basically. Number 1 is tight. Number 2 is neutral. And number 3 is basically easy money policy or accommodative. Let's call it easy. This means money supply is shrinking. This means round about the same. This means money supply is expanding. Now, central bank of every country controls this money supply. In India, the central bank is RBI. Now, in this entire world, what we are witnessing is that some central banks of the world, especially the developed countries, they are still in the neutral or tight phase. Whereas developing companies are in the easy phase. They are expanding money supply. Advanced economies are tightening it. Basically, somewhat like this. Okay. So this is not good. Generally, central banks should be in sync. Globally, money supply should either rise or fall. They should be in sync. That is what we mean by divergent. The monetary policy is diverging. Yet in this divergent monetary policy, India remains the fastest growing major economy. Growth is no longer just a recovery story, it's structural. What this line means is that, well, COVID-induced lockdowns actually destroyed every economy in the world. So most economies are recovering from that. India is not just recovering. India is way past that. India is not just recovering. India is actually showing structural changes in its economy, which means that it is on a long-term path of growth. Okay, currently the real GDP growth for as per RBI estimates is 7.4. Projected growth for next year is 6.8 to 7.2. And the best part is inflation is pretty down. CPI, Consumer Price Index, is pretty down. India is not used to this, by the way. India is used to high inflation. But this is a surprise, a positive surprise, but a surprise nonetheless, that, well, India, the country which is used to high inflation, is seeing very low inflation this time. Okay, Consumer Price Index. So good news. That is why RBI is easing money supply, which is increasing money supply, easing money supply. Okay, and medium term growth potential. Now, what do we mean by medium term? Next 3-year growth potential or next 3-year growth, GDP growth rate would average out to be around 7%. Okay, that's what we mean by medium term, next 3 years. Clear? All right. Now, what about global headwinds? Global headwinds means the environment globally. Okay. Well, globally, the environment doesn't seem nice. Okay, that's pretty obvious actually. Okay, there is trade disruption because of, well, we all know who, you know who, Donald Trump, his tariff policies and his, well, words also sometimes, his tweets sometimes, they cause real problems and the global economy is not doing well because of this. Okay, then there is policy flux. Countries are still deciding what economic policy they should follow because they don't know what Donald Trump would say the next day. Okay, USA is presently witnessing some growth. Why? Well, AI driven, the tech bros of USA, okay, they are driving American growth, but that growth is not structural, it's mostly AI driven. And many people say it is just an AI bubble. What do you mean by that? AI bubble? That this is just an artificial increase in growth rate, it is going to burst. USA growth is mostly tech related growth. Manufacturing is not that great. Services are also doing not that great, but tech companies are doing very well. Okay. In Europe, there are problems. First of all, Europe is already wary of Russia. There is a war going on around Europe. Plus, Europe is not doing well. It is also, well, not having the nicest of relations with Donald Trump, USA, their most reliable partner, trade partner. So this is a problem. And EM over here stands for emerging markets like India. Now, in emerging markets, overall inflation is pretty low, whereas in developed countries, inflation is still sticky. And that is why the central banks of the developed countries are not reducing interest rates by that much. But as far as emerging markets like India are concerned, well, they are completely easily easing up the monetary policy. So this is good news for emerging markets, not so good news for developed countries. The problems are trade wars, the three big problems of the world: trade wars, monetary divergence, central banks traversing different paths. Some are easing, some are tightening. Uncertainty. These are the three big global headwinds. Now, I want to make it clear. You need to be familiar with two words, okay? Headwinds and tailwinds. Because these terms are used in the news as well as government documents quite a lot. So headwinds means, so whenever you are swimming, or not just say swimming, when the plane is flying, okay, when an aeroplane is flying or a bird is flying, okay, so it faces resistance from the incoming wind. That is known as headwind. But if a plane is flying and the wind is pushing it from behind, then it will go faster. That is a tailwind. On its tail side, the wind is blowing, so it will go faster. On its head side, the wind is blowing against it. Basically, the plane is flying against the wind. That is headwind. Okay, so economy is facing headwinds, which means these are those conditions which will stop global economic growth. And tailwinds are those economic conditions which will push economic growth. So these are basically headwinds. You understand now? All right? Okay. Next. Yeah. So new era of economic statecraft. Now, economic statecraft, basically now countries have to reinvent themselves in managing their economies. Generally, countries were habitual of managing their economy through traditional tools like fiscal tools, expanding fiscal deficit, monetary tools, expanding money supply, growth and inflation control. Generally, countries were using fiscal policy as well as monetary policy to manage inflation levels and growth levels. But now, countries, especially USA, has started to use other tools as well, which are economic sanctions on their enemy countries who are competing with them economically, export controls, friend shoring. What do you mean by friendshoring? That most of the goods coming to India should come from Indian allies. The supply chains of the goods and services produced should come from my allies, Indian allies, not China. This is friendshoring. Goal is now national security. Earlier, the goal was economic, but now, along with economic, the goal is national security now. Why national security? Because of this key word called critical minerals. Critical minerals are important for your economy, but they are not just important for your economy, they are also important for your defense. And we have discussed critical minerals quite a lot. So I'm hoping that you're already aware with it. Okay? All right. Now, what is the strategic takeaway for India? Well, India's response has been cultivating strategic indispensability in global value chains. What do you mean by that? You know, Russia, the reason why Donald Trump put tariffs on India was that India was buying oil from Russia. Okay? But China was buying way more oil from Russia. Yet the tariffs on India were more than China. Why? Why wasn't USA punishing China that much? Okay? As much as it was punishing India. Why? Because China can retaliate. China has a chokehold, monopoly in critical minerals. So when USA threatened, basically USA threatened to put tariffs on China, China retaliated by saying that we will put export controls on critical minerals. Now, many industries in USA rely on these critical minerals. So if China would stop their supply, those industries in America would collapse. So America was scared. That's why they did not put that much tariff on China. But they were not scared of India because India couldn't retaliate properly. Okay, India can retaliate, but that retaliation would be minor. So India realized that it needs strategic indispensability. What do you mean by indispensability? That no country can ignore India. India should also have a chokehold on something so that if the world threatens India, India can retaliate. What China is currently doing. So this is the realization. By the way, now we'll talk about how India's economy has been performing well. So, well, 7.4% growth. Industry grew by 6.2%. Services was the key driver. We are a services driven economy, 9.1%. Agriculture growth rate was stable, 3.1%. Okay. Now, one more thing. Well, your economy is basically driven by consumption, investment, government spending, and exports. These are the four drivers of your economy. Either your consumption, private consumption levels are high, private investment levels are high, government spending is high, or exports are high. These are the four drivers, four contributors to growth. Okay. Now in India, remember this, India is a consumption driven economy. Consumption drives growth in India. And this time around, the reason why growth has increased is because people's consumption has also increased. 61.5% of India's GDP came from consumption, which means people are buying more goods and services. Okay. Urban demand has increased, fueled by tax rationalization. Basically, government rationalized GST rates. Okay. Rural demand is also recovering. Okay. So these are some good points. And because of that, India's economy is growing, and private final consumption expenditures share in total GDP increased to 61.5%. But mostly, majority of India's GDP comes from private final consumption. India, remember this, is a consumption-driven economy. Okay? All right. But remember, I told you that it's not just consumption that drives your economy, it's also investment, it's also government expenditure, it's also exports. Now let's talk about investment. Investment not just drives your economy. Investment is also important for one more purpose. It increases the capacity of your economy to grow more. So investment is basically expenditure on capital goods, infrastructure. So if you'll have one road in the entire country, your capacity to transport more goods and services is less. But now if you'll have two roads, your capacity would increase. Therefore, investment in these infrastructure projects is important. Okay. So it not just drives your economic growth, it also increases the future capacity of your economy to grow more. Right? So in that regard, investment has also increased. Private sector has grown. Private sector crowding in effect has happened. That means investment cycle increased, and now more and more private people are investing. Private investment has increased in India. Basically, private investment is being crowded in. More and more private players are pooling their money to invest. So this is good news. Okay. Then Industrial sector has done well. Okay, the key component in industrial sector is manufacturing sector. So basically this point is, we will cover this in inflation also. Like I said, first chapter is an introductory chapter for all the other chapters that are about to come. Okay, so we will cover this, but basically from this slide what the government is trying to convey is that manufacturing sector has grown, services sector has grown, and in fact services sector is the best sector, best performing sector. The best performing sector has been services. Services sector was the key driver of economic growth. Okay, basically driver means the key sector that increased our growth rate to 7.4%. Okay, within services sector, financial, real estate was the highest, the best. Public administration and defense was next, and trade transport was the least contributing. Yet it was contributing it grew by 7.5%. Okay, so services sector over there. Agricultural sector also grew, but that growth was not that high. It was fairly stable. And within agricultural sector, you should know this, agricultural sector is made up of 4 components. Okay, crops, when you grow crops, then animal husbandry, animal rearing, which includes cattle rearing, poultry, goat rearing, sheep rearing. Then there is forestry, agroforestry or forestry for wood cutting basically. So forestry, and last is fisheries. These are the 4 components of agricultural and allied activities. Now traditionally the highest share has been that of crop sector, and then it is animal rearing. But as far as the growth rate is concerned, well, crop sector has not been doing well and its growth rate has been declining, whereas animal rearing has increased. As you can see over here, livestock and fisheries showcase steady growth. Crop output has declined. Okay, though it will increase because favorable monsoon was there this year. All right, this is the best news. Inflation moderates, credit expands, because now inflation is low, so more and more people are taking loans. Okay, because the real interest rates have fallen down. Okay, make sense? So inflation moderates, credit expands. This is basically good news. All right. Why credit expands is good news? Because now more and more people are taking loans and then investing it. Investment has increased. This is the main key point. That is why we are happy about increase in credit. Okay. Then this is also important. Fiscal deficit should not be high. Okay. So reducing fiscal deficit is an indicator of good fiscal health. So deficit targets are on track without compromising capital expenditure. Now, fiscal deficit has been steadily declining. That's good news. But many people say that it is declining because your expenditure is also declining. That is also good news. But it's bad news if your expenditure is declining because your capital expenditure, investment expenditure is declining. So this economic survey chapter makes it clear that despite decline in expenditure, capex has been increasing, which means that the decline is coming from revenue expenditure, which is a wasteful expenditure on subsidies, salaries, pensions, all that. So this is good news, because as I said before, capex means investment is increasing, right? And fiscal deficit is declining. That means government's debt will also come down, which is good news for macroeconomic stability, right? Next, these are some points. This is India's balance sheet. Well, merchandise deficit has decreased. Services exports have increased, so services surplus has increased, and remittances from abroad. Indians living abroad are sending money home. So more money is coming to India and less money is going out of India. Deficit happens when imports exceed exports. So deficit is declining. Money inflow is increasing. So our current account deficit has become manageable. Plus our forex reserves have reached an import cover of 11 months. What do you mean by import cover? Well, we have enough foreign exchange reserves to finance our imports for 11 months. That is what we mean by import cover. So this is also good news. India has very high forex reserves. Okay. Yes, and these two things are about structural shift in India's economy. Capital expenditure is rising. Most of India's labor is now formalizing. India had this bad characteristic of having informal labor force. But due to government steps, well, now labor force is more formalizing. Okay, they have more social security benefits because of change in labor laws and all. So this is good structural shift. Efficiency has increased. Economic efficiency has increased because now more and more people are using technology, and technology definitely increases efficiency. So because of these three structural changes, well, we expect 7% average growth rate for the next 3 years in medium term. Okay, for next year, the growth potential is 6.8 to 7.2%. Risks are geopolitical, okay, global, and AI valuation corrections. What do you mean by this line? Well, AI companies are currently highly valued. Okay, some AI companies are worth 10,000 crore rupees, or some are even, yes, 10,000 crore rupees, 20,000 crore rupees. Now, this value is artificial. Now, when this AI bubble will burst, these same companies would be valued at 2,000 crores. So you would see a dip in economic wealth in India. Okay, so these AI values, these AI companies' values would come down. So this is another risk. But India has more strengths than risks. Healthy balance sheet, okay, fiscal stability, price stability, and strategic indispensability. Basically, India is trying to become indispensable like China in the global scheme of things. So this is a very good line, which you can use in your answers also during mains. Caution is warranted, that India should be cautious, but India should not be pessimistic, negative about Indian economy. Make sense? And that would be all. Now, I've tried to explain this topic, this first chapter, but remember, this is just an introductory chapter. So its notes would be available to you. You'll get more clarity after reading the notes. But I hope I was able to do justice as far as this chapter is concerned. You understood it. But nonetheless, if there are still any doubts, do ask those doubts. I always encourage your doubts. So do ask them. And I shall take your leave with the promise of seeing you again with chapter 2 of Economic Survey. Thank you, everyone.